Okay, hope you had a wonderful lunch and nice, healthy lunch. So I have April Bennett here, who is our government liaison
Legislative liaison.
and legislative liaison, who knows all of the ins and the outs about what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. And it's a little complicated because when you're a member of council, you're actually a temporary federal employee. So some of the things that apply to me and to my colleagues at NAEHS would also apply to you. But April Bennett, so do you want to give us an overview on?
Yeah, and it's also for grantees. So federally, when you're federally funded, you have certain allowable activities that you can do, and using federal funds. And educating is one of them. And so there's a whole. We'll send over a link on the how to look up what you can do as far as educating and what is considered advocating, and
which we don't want to do.
Yes, if you're advocating, you cannot use any federal funds. That could bar you from being funded.
So if someone bought a computer with a grant, they don't want to advocate or do anything or educate with a federal computer.
Yeah, you want to, in educating is what I recommend. I always recommend that folks also work with their government relations at their universities if they do want to go to the Hill, so they're aware and they can help arrange any meeting to talk with the members and educate them on the great work that your grants are doing. I also we do have the Friends of NAEHS, and they're a great resource as well. You're welcome to talk with them, and any other professional or health organizations, and to work on educating on the Hill. But education is key, as Gwen said. Just wanted to clarify that. And also on the NIH reform, NIH is aware, and we are reviewing the various congressional proposals. There's two currently out. One's in the Senate and one is in the House. And I put that information in the director's report under the congressional activities. So feel free to look at those links and see what be informed on what those proposals are. And we're always willing to work with Congress and our many partners to identify ways to optimize NIH and bolster the biomedical research efforts. So just NIH is aware of them, of these efforts, and we just wanted to make sure that you all were aware as well. And I'm happy to point you to more information. Feel free to just email me on either talking with members of Congress or on these NIH reform.
So April.Bennett, BENNETT.
Yep.
At NIH.gov.
Yep.
And so feel free to contact April, but remember, anything that you email is foiable. So just be careful about that.
So happy to talk with you, anybody that is interested in either of these topics, and point you to where they can be found. But a lot of the resources are already in the congressional report in Rick's director's report.
So the key thing is, in the first topic, we educate. Okay, and the second topic is that there are a couple of different proposals for potential reorganization of the NIH. One of them we talked about this morning, bringing the number of ICs to 15, and that's in my report. No, I don't think the other one.
The Senate one's in there too.
Okay.
There's a link to Senator Cassidy's as well in there. So happy to take any questions or point you to more resources. And I know some of the stakeholders across DC, across the country, did weigh in on both of these proposals. So hopefully we'll see what comes.
So any quick questions for
April? I was just wondering, April, where in the ECB would the director's report be? I think I see everyone but the directors. Is that in the ECB on the tab?
Daryl, I'll jump
Ashley,
in.
I think that's-
It's not yet on there. We don't have Rick's
Okay.
slides. We can certainly add them. I think we normally add them after the fact. We'll also add David, so you
Right,
have
right,
those
ahead
as
of
a
time.
reference.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you very much, Ashley.
Mhm.
Thanks, April.
Okay, well, so it'll be coming your way.
yep.
Okay, great. So let's see here. So Rick, April will be able to share Rick's slides with the public. So yeah.
I mean, I don't see why not.
I don't see there, I mean, my slides are just simply summarizing things that are in the public domain. It was a very quick summary of the strategic plan. And the strategic plan is in the public domain. Anyone can read it.
Excellent. So
if
then
it's
I think,
useful, if it's useful to get my slides, happy to share them.
thank you. So then I think for the members of the public listening, we will also be able to place Rick's slides with those actionable links on the public facing website for you shortly.
Right. And actually, we have detailed minutes coming out of the open sessions. So I don't know if we can share those as well. So
Yes,
anything I
those
said.
do get posted on the webpage as well.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, anyone? So if there are no other questions, April, thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for everything you do for us.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, David, back to you.
Yeah, thanks,
Grab the
Rick.
door. Thanks.
So getting into our afternoon of presentations from DERT staff. Our first one is a program that Rick has alluded to in his last couple director's comments. It's a program that is being supported by the NIH Common Fund that we're presenting to you for information. This is not a concept that it requires approval. It's approved by the advisory council, the director. But this is the Complement Animal Research in Experimentation program, or complementary. And Dan Shaughnessy is one of the program coordinators for the program, and is going to give us an overview of exactly what complementary is and will be. I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thanks, David. For some reason, I'm still seeing some tab up here. Oh, that's a little better.
Yeah.
So yes, thanks. It's my privilege today to give you an update on this Common Fund program, complementary, on behalf of the Planning Committee. And as David mentioned, Rick's covered this in the last two council rounds and alluded to it this morning. So complementary, the name really highlights the fact that this program is really intended to complement current animal research through the development and validation of what are called new approach methodologies, sometimes called novel alternative methods. But the real goal is to expand the toolkit in biomedical research. But there are cases where a NAMS might fill in for an area where there isn't a good animal model, or the current models are insufficient to model complex human biology. So the purpose of this program is to catalyze the development, standardization, validation, and use of human-based new approach methodologies that will transform the way we do basic translational and clinical science. And I emphasize here human-based because there was a decision early in the planning process for this program to focus on NAMs that are developed using human cells or human clinical data. And this is not to say that other types of NAMs, for example, non-mammalian systems like C. elegans and zebrafish, aren't a critical resource for hazard screening and for understanding the response to drugs, new chemicals or products on the market, or environmental toxicants. But for this program, the decision was really to focus on the development of human-based NAMs. So the goals of the program are to better model and understand human health and disease outcomes across diverse populations, to develop NAMs that provide insights into specific biological processes or disease states, to validate mature NAMs, and to support their regulatory use and the standardization of the NAMS data and regulatory framework. And then again, to complement traditional models to make biomedical research more effective and efficient. So this is a slide of the working group, and you can see it's a really large group. The program is co-chaired by Rick and also by Dr. Joni Rutter, who's the director of NCATS, or the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. Margaret Ochasinska is at the Office of Strategic Coordination, and she kind of leads the entire coordination of the program. And then I co-coordinate this with Dan Tagley at NCATS. I also want to call out the substantial input that Nicole Kleinstroyer here at NAEHS has put in, especially kind of envisioning the program at the beginning as a subject matter expert in the validation of alternative methods. And Dan and Nicole have joined the call today, so when we get to the question and answer, they can chime in as well. So you can see again, there's representation over 23 institutes and centers for the NIH planning group for this. And then more recently, we have some folks from EPA and FDA who have joined in the working group. Let's see. So a little bit, I'm sorry about if you're getting that tab at the top, but some information on the program development timeline. So in June of 2023, the NIH Common Fund put together a working group to begin exploring this concept of complementary, and through the summer and fall undertook a number of planning activities, including a deep landscape analysis, several listening sessions, an interagency workshop, and a challenge ideation prize. And I'll talk about these in more detail. But in parallel, the NIH Advisory Committee to the Director actually formed a separate working group on catalyzing the development and use of NAMs to advance biomedical research, again, starting in that early June time frame. And then over the summer, they conducted a number of stakeholder engagement activities, including a workshop that was held in August of 2023, and they published a request for information and collected all that information in September. So in mid-December, the ACD working group presented their report and the recommendations from those findings to the NIH leadership. And then in February, the NIH director accepted those recommendations. So for the complementary planning process, based on those activities through the summer and the fall, the concept was refined and then presented to the NIH Institute directors in December. And then Rick and Joni presented the concept to the NIH Council of Councils in January 25th this year, and the concept was approved. So just to give you an idea of some of the major work products from complementary. So this involves NAMs of three different main types. The complex in vitro models that are used to can emulate population diversity, for example, in precision medicine applications. Then in silico or multi-scale systems to begin to understand biological processes using computational methods for healthy and diseased individuals. And then in chemical approaches, which are cell-free systems to kind of understand biological and biochemical changes, for example, for a drug or a toxin. And again, the idea for complementary is to combine these different kinds of NAMs into integrated approaches and then generate fair data sets that can be used to generate predictable predictions, for example, in digital twin and other approaches. So this activity really builds on previous and current activities across all the NIEHS centers related to NAMs. And this involves things like the support for digital twin models for treatment of various diseases, complex in vitro systems, microphysiological systems, 3D organoid models for multiple tissues, organs, and disease conditions. And then a variety of in silico and machine learning or artificial intelligence models across a number of diseases and conditions, including things like neurodegenerative disease, learning and behavior, and applications in SARS-CoV-2 research. And then also in chemical screening approaches that were used, for example, in the TOX21 high throughput screening studies, and then also are the basis for biochemical assays for skin irritation and ocular toxicity. So again, what complementary wants to do is to combine these efforts in combined or integrated NAMs to better model the complexity of human diseases and in a data ecosystem to help standardize NAMs data generation and sharing. So again, a little bit more on these strategic planning activities for Common Fund. We held 3 listening sessions it was last October with major stakeholders, and that included members of academia, industry, non-governmental organizations, our government partners and regulatory and other government agencies, and then even some folks from international groups working in the NAEHS field. We also held an in-person meeting on the NIH campus in October. It was a federal interagency retreat, and that had obviously members of the NIH working group, but also FDA, EPA, NSF, all these groups that are all have their own kind of mission-specific development of NAMs. And it included members of the Interagency Coordinating Committee for the Validation of Alternative Methods, or ICVAM, as well, from those agencies. So through a lot of those initial planning activities, there were a couple of main scientific needs that kind of came to the forefront. And one was the what we're calling chronicity, the application of NAMs to kind of study diseases and conditions across the lifespan. Neuroscience, neurodegenerative disease, neurobehavioral, and neurodevelopmental diseases also came, as priorities for the needs for NAMs. There was a kind of general consensus about the need for NAMs in personalized health, for example, in personalized medicine or developing patient-targeted therapies. Cross-disease pathogenesis coming, addressing things like metabolism, immunity, et cetera. And then population diversity from both our planning activities and the ACD recommendations was a common theme for incorporating into NAMs. So in terms of operational needs, there was a consensus that the field really needs a shared data infrastructure, and we need standardized frameworks for the qualification or validation of NAMs for regulatory use. And then across the whole continuum, there's a consensus that we need training from the point of view of NAMs developers all the way through the stakeholders into what NAMs are and how they can be used. So other activities included a deep landscape analysis and an ideation challenge prize. So for the landscape analysis, this was a comprehensive look at the literature to identify the published literature where there are gaps or opportunities and remaining challenges in the area of NAMs for all the different individual types. And then also a look at the studies that were really considering the fairness of NAMs data needed to be able to interpret and use NAMs across different groups. So you can see this comprehensive analysis on the Common Fund complimentary webpage through this link, or just go to the webpage and you'll find all these materials. So in addition, we held a complimentary concept prize challenge. And the goal here was really to get folks to begin to think about the next generation of NAMs, kind of out of the box approaches for what can NAMs do in the future, and what types of new NAMs may benefit from further investment through this program or through NIH. So there were 20 challenge prize winners selected. Each of those winning teams received $50,000 for their innovative solution, for a total prize purse of $1 million. And you can look at the summaries for all 20 of these also on the Common Fund complimentary webpage. So I thought I'd just mention 3 examples here that kind of illustrate some of the integrated ways that people are thinking NAMs could be used. So the first one is a team from Delaware Click Chemistries, and they're proposing the application of a click chemistry approach for measuring how quickly cells express new proteins, or tissues express new proteins under different conditions. And they're applying this to testing over 3,000 FDA-approved drugs used in the treatment of osteoarthritis, using these in knee cartilage samples. And they're developing an AI/ML algorithm for the data analysis. The second example is from Predictive LLC, and this group is developing a computational approach that involves molecular models, a developmental toxicology or toxicity knowledge graph, and a web portal for toxicology predictions for identifying developmental toxicants. And then the third example here of the winners was a group from the University of North Texas, and they've developed this multi-scale engineered heart construct, and then a novel kind of software to detect cardiovascular disease patterns from the engineered constructs. So based on all of these activities, the planning group came up with this program structure, and it's centered around the support for a number of technology development centers that it will stimulate the development of NAMs to fill in areas of greatest need. And that's really trying to fill in where the current animal models really don't tell us, they either don't exist or don't tell us enough about human biology. And there's an emphasis on kind of capturing the complexity, increasing complexity of biology, including immune response, adaptive immunity, and aging. The comprehensive centers will kind of emphasize these combinatorial approaches and have an extensive training component as well. So the second component for the program is a NAMS data hub and coordinating center. And the goal here is to create integrated data structures and model standards for model credibility, to really improve the fairness of NAMS related data, create a searchable NAMS repository. And this will be the central data repository for the entire NAMS the complementary consortium. A third component is the validation and qualification network. This is envisioned as a public-private partnership that can help to establish common data elements and standardized reporting for NAMs, especially as they're applied in regulatory settings, to accelerate their deployment and regulatory implementation. And then the fourth component is a community engagement and training effort. And one of the primary goals here is to promote the development of the multidisciplinary inclusive workforce that's going to be needed with the skills to build and use this new generation of NAMs. And there's a focus here also on the societal and ethical issues with the development and use of NAMs. So here is a graphical representation of how the consortium will look. Again, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the centers will, again, have this integrated NAMS technology development piece, as well as a number of pilot projects later on in the program, several cores, an administrative core, an LC core, and a data collection and sharing core. And again, the community engagement and training will be an important component of these comprehensive centers. The centers will interact with the data hub and coordinating centers in this kind of hub and spoke model. And then both the NAMS comprehensive centers and the data hub will interact with the validation and qualification network. And that will include members, obviously, of ICFAM and the planning group with our federal and regulatory partners, as well as potentially industry partners, nonprofits, et cetera, in those efforts. So again, the proposal here is to establish, working in concert with the Foundation for NIH, this public-private partnership, again, with the goal of establishing some of the standardized reporting that I've talked about. So we're exploring this NIH-FNIH partnership to bring in industry and the other groups into a more comprehensive network. This will be at the pre-competitive data sharing stage. And one of the goals here is to support validation activities across the labs using specific use cases to kind of implement the process. There'll also be a community outreach and training aspect to the validation qualification network, especially getting feedback from some of the regulatory partners for the NAMS developers early in the process, so that those NAMs kind of meet the needs for context of use, whether they're going through a validation or qualification study. And then the VQN will also provide a funnel for the solutions that are going to be developed for comprehensive or combinatorial NAMs through the comprehensive centers. And then we also envision that we'll coordinate with other global groups working in the NAEHS field to share information and establish kind of standard reporting. So Rick showed this slide this morning. We released a notice of intent to publish, and this is for the technology development centers. The estimated release date for this notice of funding opportunity is October 18th, and you can find this again on the Complementary Common Fund webpage for more details. Also look on that page because we put together a list of frequently asked questions as people are sending in questions about the program and its scope. So this is just a last slide to kind of illustrate this fluid conduit between stakeholder engagement and implementation that goes through technology development, through centralized data resources, and this effort for standardizing and accelerating validation and qualification. And you can see that a big component of this is going to be training and dissemination on aspects of NAEHS throughout. I'd like to again emphasize that bidirectional arrow here in the need for kind of early feedback, I think, from the end users to the NAEHS developers, so that the NAEHS that are being developed meet the requirements for either for regulatory use or just wider biomedical use as well. So I think that's all I have, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Dan, I don't know if you mentioned this, but this common fund proposal was unanimously supported by, I think, almost all institutes and centers at the NIH. So it's clearly an area of interest and focus that's of great interest here across the NIH. So other comments?
Bevan.
Looks like
Yeah,
Bevan has a comment.
Yeah, just wondering what your plan is for advertising. How will people find out about this?
Well, as I said, there's information already on the Common Fund webpage for this. And I mentioned the notice of intent to publish for the technology development centers. We'll also have a notice of intent to publish for the data hub as well. That'll probably come out a little bit later. Once these are on the street, we'll have a series of webinars so that people can call in and get more information. You know, we can share a lot more detail on the requirements for both the centers and the other components.
There are
So
questions or
October
comments for
18th
Dan?
was the date that what the NOFO is going out in October. What's going on October 18th? Just remind me.
Yeah, so that's when the Technology Development Center NOFO should be released. Once it goes through kind of final approvals.
Yep. Yeah, most people don't know about this. So you can help us, all members of council, you can help us spread the word on it. And again, just emphasizing the point that Dan made is that NAMs are not just human-based. It's just with the NIH, we have limited money. And it was what, $30 million per year, if I remember correctly?
That's right.
And Nicole Kleinstreyer just put in the chat that you can also get more information on the Common Fund webpage. So that's commonfund.nih.gov/complementary with the misspelling of complementary.
That's right.
If there are no more questions or comments, I think we can go on to our two concept approvals that we need. So the first is from Dr. Claudia Thompson, who is the chief of our population health branch, who will be talking about the Environmental Health Sciences Core Centers. So Claudia, you want to share your screen?
I am trying to share my screen. Do you see it?
Yeah, it's still in the
Yep,
Yes.
I've just put it
There it
in
is.
presentation mode. Looks like it's right.
Yep, full screen. You look good.
Okay, perfect. Let me move this down a little bit. Okay, so good afternoon. As David said, I'm Claudia Thompson. I am the program director for the Environmental Health Sciences Core Center program, and it's my pleasure to be presenting to Council this afternoon a concept for the continuation of the Environmental Health Sciences Core Center program. But before I begin, there are many individuals that make up the Core Center team that I publicly want to acknowledge and thank, starting with Liam O'Fallon, who directs the Community Engagement Core and also helps co-lead the program with me, to Cara Chamberlain, who provides not only analytical support, but has interfaced with the Translational Research Support Cores and the business administrators. And the three of us really provide that sort of programmatic oversight to the center's program. I'd like to acknowledge James Willings, who's a task lead, and Camille Association, Latavia Miller, and Clark Phillips, who are the primary grants management specialists for the program, and Varsha Sokol and Leroy Worth, who conduct review of the center's programs each year with support from program specialists Charmise Allen, Deborah Jones, and Kendra Morrison. And I also want to acknowledge Christy Pettipone from the program analysis branch, who's been intimately involved in supporting both extensive and less extensive evaluations of the program that I'll talk about at the end of this presentation, and has really been instrumental in helping to push the translational research framework and thinking about how we move science and communicate how we move science from the Core Centers program. So this afternoon, I plan to provide a bit of background about the Core Centers for those that may be less familiar with this program, and then move into discussing how the structure of the Core Centers facilitates the advancement of environmental health sciences by highlighting examples from some of the different activities within the center, including career development, the pilot project program, translational research, and disaster response. At the end of the discussion of some of these highlights, I will present visions for moving forward and the concept. Through the vignettes that I'll be presenting today, my goal will have been to demonstrate that the centers really are more than a collection of research scientists conducting their individual research with support from facility cores at a center, but rather the centers provide a holistic framework that serves as incubators for advancing science and science innovation, supporting translational research, developing future of environmental health science leaders, and innovating community engagement and partnerships. So first, I just talk a little bit about the background and structure of the centers. So on this slide, the Core Centers guide and support environmental health research at an institution and a region, and they have 5 goals that they undertake. To implement those goals, the Core Centers have a structure that each center has. It's illustrated on the right side of the slide. It begins with the administrative core, which is the leadership for the center that sets the stage and the vision for the environmental health activities within the center, as well as providing sort of that financial oversight. Centers tend to be focus on various scientific themes, which are cross-cutting topics that facilitate innovation in team science. These are not static, and they can change as the science evolves and emerges. As I've mentioned, career development is really key to advancing the careers of early stage investigators to be the future leaders in environmental health, and the career development activities cultivates the careers of new and early stage investigators. The pilot project program is that part of the Core Center that actually allows for primary research. It supports short-term projects to explore new areas of study. Centers can allocate up to 25% of their budget towards the pilot project program. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a future slide. So the heart of a Core Center of the P30 mechanism is infrastructure, and that infrastructure is around facility cores that provide technology, service, or instrumentation to support the research being conducted by the center members. In addition to that role, the facility cores also innovate. They develop new and cutting-edge methodologies and technologies to support the ever-evolving complex issues that we see in the environmental health sciences field. The centers also have required translational research support corps. We talked a bit about that this morning, the importance of science not being static, and that it's not enough to just have publications, but rather how we move science to impact health. And so the translational research support corps is really sort of a key piece of the centers that integrates across the centers to implement the translational vision that's set forth by the director of the center. And lastly, community engagement corps is another required component of the centers that facilitate multi-directional communication to address community concerns. And I truly believe that community engagement is really the heart of the center. It is what puts the face and the reason why we exist. How do we use our science to better human health and public health? So with that bit of background, what is the core center? So on this slide on the left is a map of the current 26 centers that we're supporting at NAEHS. They support over 1,900 members, and those members have published over 1,600 peer-reviewed papers in 2023 that were cited over 4,000 times. In addition to the peer-reviewed literature, it's really important like how we translate that information. And so through the CEC, on other aspects of the center, a number of resources of gray literature that have been created. These can include written fact sheets, they can include educational training materials, infographics, videos, etc. that can be used by communities and other interested parties. So I'd like to turn my attention to the centers and what the structure has enabled the centers to do. And I'd like to highlight career development. As I mentioned earlier, one of the goals for the core centers is to invest in the next generation of environmental health sciences leaders. Each center develops career enhancement activities for their identified recipients. They each can take different approaches to how they do that, but if we look at it as an aggregate, there are some pretty common features of career development activities within centers. These include collaborative activities between the recipient and other center members, one-on-one mentoring of the career development recipient with senior leadership, guidance that can include grant writing, etc. Through the centers, the recipients receive research support that can include preferential access to pilot project funds or preferential access to center facility core resources. The activities can also include leadership skills and continuous engagement with mentors and senior leadership. But ultimately, the career development awards are to go from the awards to enhance research funding that can lead to independent funding and career advancement. In May, we put a call out to the center directors asking them to provide information on some of their career award recipients since 2017. Tell us a little bit about the grants that they've received, publications or other achievements of these individuals, and then how the centers helped advance their careers. So we got responses back from 19 centers, and sort of the anecdotal summary of the information received is summarized on this slide. That we've seen approximately 223 individuals have received career enhancing activities since 2017. They've used 135 pilot awards and has resulted in over 228 NIH grants being awarded to these career development recipients. As well as, I would say, quite an impressive number of publications that come out of this group. So it's great to talk about numbers, but really it's important to put that face behind this program. And if David would give me another couple of hours instead of 30 minutes, I would be so thrilled to be able to tell you stories of many of our individuals that have gone through this program, but I'm going to focus today on one, and that's Diana Hernandez, who's a tenured associate professor of social medical sciences at Columbia University. She's a sociologist by training, and her work is focused on social environmental determinants of health and examines the impacts of policy and place-based interventions. She was a career development recipient between 2016 and 2018. During that time, she received mentoring, targeted training in her area of expertise, received research support through pilot projects and scientific enrichment. She had, during that tenure as a career development recipient, she had over 40 publications, and as you can see, she's been quite prolific in her publication record. She also has received NIH funding, and she's also been provided opportunities for leadership roles within the centers. And when the Columbia Center was renewed in 2023, Dr. Hernandez was named as the deputy director for the center. In addition to those activities, some of her other accomplishments include serving on the Mayor's Office to New York City's inaugural Environmental Justice Board, and she's also received a Robert Woods Johnson Foundation Award to explore racial disparities in home energy services. Nope, it's not coming forward, excuse me, having a technical input. So now I'd like to switch to the pilot project program. I mentioned earlier that this is the one part of the center where funds can be used to support primary research. And overall, I would say there are like three sort of main areas of use for pilot projects. One is developing that preliminary data that can be used to support the development of a grant application. It can also be used to test feasibility of new interesting ideas, so that allows for sort of that high risk, high reward kinds of activities. And it's also an opportunity to bring in new individuals who may not be working in the environmental health sciences to be able to have space to explore how environmental exposures can impact the areas of research that they're conducting. So when we look at the pilot project program since 2007, there have been over 595 pilot projects that have been supported through the Core Centers program with an investment of over $13 million. And one of the metrics of success for the pilot projects is really how does that money get leveraged for return on investment and resulting in additional R01 investments. And so when you look at the program, we see there's about a 12-to-1 return on investment, but the range for that return on investment is quite large, as you can see on this slide, ranging from $2.5 to 1 to over $15 million to 1 return on investment. And so I'd just like to highlight one pilot project. And the point of putting this slide up there is that a small investment, and these pilot projects range from usually between $5,000 to $10,000 to $50,000 for 1, possibly 2 years of support. But that small investment can have long-term ramifications. And this is an example of one of those. And this is a pilot project that was provided to Dr. Mazumdar at Harvard University, where she is interested in neural tube defects and arsenic exposure. Her pilot allowed her to get preliminary data looking at the relationship between arsenic and neural tube defects. And she also parlayed some of those pilot funds with other funding to test the feasibility of developing a birth defect surveillance program in Bangladesh, where most of her scientific career has been focused. She was able to take the preliminary findings from that pilot project to submit an R01 to the ONES program, and she received a ONES awardee in 2016 to continue that research. And more recently, she's received a second R01 that has continued to advance this area of research and now looking at the epigenetics of arsenic and neural tube defects. But the other point I wanted to make on this is that return on investment and that science can take a long time to actually impact. And for the long-term presence that Dr. Mazumdar has had in Bangladesh and the research she has conducted and the evidence that she has provided over time, that work has helped to inform the Bangladesh Ministry of Health passing a number of resolutions related to spina bifida, including setting standards for folate intake and creating a surveillance program for neural defects for the program. And so the next part of this, my presentation, is again to focus on the center structure and how it provides nimble translation and collaborative space for advancing environmental health sciences. So this wasn't planned, but one of the, I think, cool features of the centers that they really are able to embrace emerging exposures of concern. And one of those are microplastics we heard about this morning. And I just have a couple examples here. So partnership between Rutgers and Columbia developed a imaging platform that was was both high throughput and high specificity. They took that platform and used it to look at the micro and nanoplastics that are in bottled water. And what they showed was there can be up to 400,000 nanoplastic particles per liter of bottled water. And this is many orders of magnitude greater than the amount of microplastics in water. So this is pretty alarming to see that. University of New Mexico has had a focus on looking at the body burden of microplastics, and they've reported on a number of studies along this line. But one that I wanted to highlight just came out in preprint probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's focused on looking at micro and nanoplastics in human brains. They collected autopsy brains from 2016 and 2024, and the upshot of the study is that they saw that there was 50% higher levels of micro and nanoplastics in samples between 2016 and 2024, and that the increase is a similar rate is found in the environment. The other point that they showed is that it seems that the brain is a preferential sink for micro nanoplastics. When they compared levels of these particles to other tissues such as liver and kidney, they saw that the brain had up from between 7 and 30 times more micro or nanoplastics than the other tissues. The last story that I want to tell about microplastics, to really focus and highlight the centers as an incubator for movement of science and allowing space for teams of scientists across many disciplines to come together to focus on a topic. And on this slide is a work that's been at the University of Rochester through both use of pilot projects, information and community inputs, and allowing time for team building. A group of researchers across University of Rochester has been focusing probably for the last couple of years or so on the issues of microplastics, responding to concerns of communities. What they're able to do with this time to really incubate and think about the issue and get preliminary data was to apply to the NIHS Oceans and Human Health Program, and they were successful in receiving a PO1 to continue their work on looking at the life cycle of microplastics exposure, distribution, and the impacts of changing climate in the Great Lakes region. So we've talked a lot today and this morning about translational research, and I think another key feature of our centers is that we're always thinking about how do we move science from that fundamental question to impact. And what I'm showing on this slide is how the importance and the value of bidirectional community engagement in order to move the science. And so I think if I mentioned earlier, the community engagement scores can serve to facilitate that bi- and multi-directional communication. And in doing that, they bring questions of communities back to the center. And so this example from UPenn started with a question from the community of how does air pollution affect lung cancer incidence? So using not only P30 resources and a funded R01, researchers at UPenn conducted research to look at age-adjusted lung cancer incidence. They're able to take that information and also think about hazard indices that were based on point emissions for over 400 zip codes to correlate with lung cancer incidence. This work was also published, but an important piece of it also is how do we translate that information to make an impact? So through use of pilot projects and a collaboration with the Cancer Center, they created community-based infographics to increase the uptake of lung cancer screening. And all of this data taken together provides information and evidence that can be used for informing policy. The next example that I would like to mention is that since we've implemented the translational research framework, we've really spent a lot of time emphasizing its application in the core centers. And I thank Christy Pettyville for being a real strong advocate for this. And so centers have taken this to heart and have used it to be able to describe their work and how they've been able to move the science around and across the translational research framework. I put the slide up here that's from NC State University, showing how their translation efforts are related to heavy metals. And I do want to point out that that's sort of a grounding study for this framework is the NAEHS study that's looking at lead cadmium clusters in Durham, North Carolina, that's been led by Catherine Hoyer, who's on council. And I'm not going to go into all the details on this slide, but just to show that from a study, additional fundamental questions are asked. There's use of an application of those questions and use of different components of the Core Center program, thinking about how that information can be implemented, not only for advancing education, but for citizen science, for additional research, how that in turn moves to practice, whether it is classroom activities, new research, supporting, again, KRF technology for ongoing field screening or other collaborations at the State Department of Health and Human Services. Ultimately leaving to impact, and this could be impact at an individual level for additional funding. It can be impact and providing evidence to local, state, federal agencies for consideration of risk. A third piece, I think, of the power of the core centers is in-center collaborations. And that, you know, the centers are not monoliths, they're not silos, but it's important like how we can foster collaboration across centers and that there's more power in networking than individually. And so I wanted to give three really quick examples of this power of collaboration. It also highlights something that we've done in the past, which is the value of opportunity funds that have been released by NAEHS to encourage collaborations across the centers. And so the three examples I want to provide is the first one is the Imperial Valley work. So the residents of Imperial Valley have a long history of cumulative exposures, including poor air quality from many different sources, including the drying of the Salton Sea. This area is along the US-Mexico border and has one of the highest asthma hospitalization emergency room visit rates in the state for school-aged children. The community residents were very concerned about the impacts of air pollution. However, there was a lack of air monitors in the region, and there was a lack of understanding of what was in the dust. And so in 2014, there was a research action project that was led by the Public Health Institute, including a partnership with Comité Cervejo del Valle, which I am going to call CCV because, as you can tell, my Spanish is non-existent, and the EHS Core Center program at the University of Washington. Through this research to action, they co-developed a community air monitoring network. One of the center members at UW, Edmund Cito, developed an inexpensive real-time air monitors and closely worked with CCV team on how to install and maintain them. In parallel, project that was supported through a P30 Opportunity Fund, we saw that the University of Southern California and Iowa focused on dust exposure of the drying Salton Sea in response to community concerns. And that was identified by the CCV. Through this effort, USC began to coordinate with the Research to Action project at University of Washington. And an outcome of these activity of these two projects was a new Research to Action that's been funded to focus on child respiratory health. This project has been leveraging and building upon these partnerships. A second story that I'd like to mention is air sensor story. This was in response to a P30 Opportunity Fund solicitation. That was a collaborative team that developed training materials to fill knowledge gaps of use of sensors. The partnerships include University of Rochester, University of North Carolina, University of Texas Medical Branch Galveston, WEAC, and Columbia University. These materials and workshops help diverse audience understand the potential for using user-friendly air quality sensor to address community concerns. The workshop provided slide decks on basic information of sources, regulations, health effects, an overview of the different kinds of sensors that are out there on the market, how they can be used, and also an interactive action plan to help participants apply for what they learned to a real problem. And this material was has been recently updated. This is free for download at the University of Rochester website. And the last story that I wanted to mention very quickly is actually an older story, and it's actually what I would say organic networking across the centers that demonstrated collaboration across centers that brought together research and community engagement teams. It was responsive at that time to the unexpressed uncertainties of new oil and gas extraction approach. Trevor Penning at UPenn led the Intercenter Working Group. Through funds used at the individual centers, they support cross-center projects to examine environmental health questions. They put out position papers. The community engagement corps engage in translational research efforts and coordination with the research team. They receive pilot projects to take the information they were getting from the research to put out funding. And why I wanted to highlight this effort is that it shows the power of the centers and being able to move quickly to address issues of concern. And Aubrey Miller, who leads our disaster research response, always takes this example as sort of an impetus of what the power of considering how we can move disaster research response. And so talking about disaster research response, this is my sort of little segue. When we think about nimbleness of the program and having a structure in place that allows us to move the science, I just wanted to highlight how the centers have been responsive to disasters that occur. And the first example is from the Pacific Northwest Center at Oregon State University. Within their program, they have a flexible just-in-time pilot grant funding opportunities that allows for rapid response. So they rapidly responded to the East Palestine train derailment to start a canine sentinel exposure study where they adopted their silicone wristbands to be able to put around dogs' necks to be able to understand what the exposures of the communities could be to the chemicals that were released from the train derailment. A second example that I'd like to mention is from the University of Washington. The center there was developing a technology to collect blood samples at home and developing innovation to stabilize RNA for shipment so that people did not have to come into a blood draw to be able to participate in studies. This innovation in collection and stabilization RNA allowed for transcriptomics analysis of samples. Through pilot funding to the EDGE program, they were able to take this technology and apply it to wildfires in the Northwest. And so through that initial technology development, the pilot allowed them to collect samples before, during, and after wildfire smoke in both high and low wildfire areas. This has resulted in 2 publications to date, and the preliminary data they collected from this pilot fund has allowed them to be successful in receiving an R21 to continue this work. So in summary, I hope that I have been able to show you the centers, the structure of a center allows them to be nimble. It allows for opportunities for collaboration and allows for incubation of really being able to move the environmental health sciences forward and to develop our future environmental health sciences leaders. This morning, we heard about the new strategic plan, and I would just like to posit that the core centers have been well positioned in the past to advance and accelerate the strategic plans of the NAEHS. And although I didn't talk about all of these areas, many of them have been working in the space, and I just foresee as the centers move forward, that they will continue to be able to support the vision of our institute. And so I'm just going to end with these last couple of slides. I've talked a lot about what we have done. And as program director for the center, we're always looking to where we should go. And one of the ways that we need to do that is really critically looking at our centers over time, both for outcome and process of like the structure do we have in place? Is it really helping to move the science? Is it still valuable? Is it still meeting the goals that we want to see for the centers program? So this just slide highlights that over the last 20 years, we've had multiple evaluations of the center, some very in-depth, such as in 2004 and 2015, that really resulted in some transformative major changes to the structure of the centers program, and others that have been a little more incremental, asking very sort of specific questions and seeing how we're doing and kind of get a check. One of the points I wanted to make here is that the last full evaluation that we did of the center was in 2015. So it's been about 10 years ago. So if we have time, I really would like to have a conversation with council to think about, from this presentation, our conversations, like, what are the questions you have about the centers that we could maybe address in an evaluation? And so, in addition to the evaluations, as I've said, we're always looking at where there's identified opportunities and how the centers can rise to those opportunities. And I've just listed a few here. One, including building research capacity for the gap areas on the map that can include the MSIs, HBCUs, tribal college and universities, and other underfunded institutions. To date, we've done a few little things, including offering webinars and technical assistance to institutions across the United States. We've talked a lot about leveraging NIH assets, and that, with the current economic climate, we're asking to do more with less. So it's really important that we think about how to leverage our assets to make the most that we can with the dollars that we have. We've implemented this in a couple of different ways. One, our new eligibility criteria that recognize that environmental health research is done outside of the NIEHS, as well as trying to develop growing connections through our pilot projects. We're seeing across the centers program that many are capitalizing on other NIH centers at their universities to be able to expand their pilot projects to really bring in investigators from many other fields. Another opportunity is enabling greater cross-center collaborations. I gave a few examples of that already, so I don't think I need to say more, but what more could we do to actively encourage? We currently have, also led by Trevor Penning, an intercenter working group on climate change and health, and we see many opportunities for continuing that collaborations, whether it's with financial support or not. And lastly, bringing diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility into the center structure. At the Mount Sinai center meeting about 3 years ago, the focus on that was how can the centers really become leaders in DEIA for environmental health sciences? What can they do at the university, their center level? And what could we at NIEHS do to help facilitate DEIA? So a couple of initial things that we have done is that the center program is now eligible for receiving diversity supplements. And we've also added, both at the request of the center directors and the reviews of the center, requiring plans to enhance diverse perspectives have been added to the center's RFA. But where I see really great opportunities in the future is in this area of building research capacity for the gap areas on the map. And I hope that we have time today. I would really like to hear from you and work together on how we could advance that and bring more academic institutions into the environmental health science, build the capacity of those that are not as research intensive and not been in this field to be able to advance our mission. And so my last slide is really sort of the concept of for the continuation of the core centers programs. At this point, I'm suggesting that we continue with the P30 mechanism and that we reissue the RFA with annual receipt dates for the next 3 years. Changing the minimum requirements, realizing that research occurs elsewhere and being able to recognize that in the base for the eligibility, so that we've changed it that there's $3 million in direct costs of environmental health science projects that can be a mix of NIH, federal, and private grant support, but at least 50% of the research base must be from NIH. And we're also proposing that the structure of the center for now remain pretty much the same with a required administrative facility cores, required career development activities, community engagement core, continuation of the pilot project program. And what we instituted about 3 or 4 years ago was the centers to articulate a translational vision, and we'd like to see that continue, as well as adding plans for enhancing diverse perspectives. And with that and the losing of my voice, I want to thank you for your attention. And at this point, I will be turning over to our council discussants, Dr. Gary Miller and Dr. Daryl Hood, to talk about the concept. And if we have time, have a couple of questions that I'd like to pose to council on getting input on recommendations for advancing our efforts to address those gap areas. And if we do venture into another evaluation of the center, what topics or focus areas would you be interested with that? And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Dr. Miller and Hood to lead our council discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Claudia. That was a great overview. When I was asked to review this concept, I was happy to do it. I reflected back that I think it was 25 years ago that I received a pilot grant from a P30 at one institution. I've been involved with them at 3 different universities at multiple levels. And looking from a council perspective, one of the things I really like to look back on is that history is the evolution of these P30s in that time. Is that it's not all the same places that have been funded for 25 years. Like the places that haven't been as competitive and haven't been as innovative, they sunsetted. New people have been brought into it. I've seen the regular evaluation and changes of the guidelines and the RFAs and things that have allowed experimentation and feedback from that, and really seen it develop in a way that's been very strong. To me, like one of the key parts of the P30s I see is that this is one of the best places for NAEHS's values to go to the research community. Individual R01s have a hard time like kind of holding on to that, but valuing the community engagement and the diversification and the innovation, that's like the core of the P30s. And so it's been very helpful in that. The one thing that I think that wasn't really touched upon as a research administrator is not all institutes have a P30 program. And in talking to university provosts and presidents and vice presidents of research, the P30s from NIEHS have allowed environmental health sciences to thrive at many universities. At a time like when occupational health residencies were closing down, when you have a P30, provosts and presidents and deans listen to that. They see that, and you build programs around it. And so to me, the P30s have been really one of the marquee programs of NIEHS because of how much it's helped build the programs at universities. So I'm very enthusiastic behind them. Like I think it's something we should consider. Definitely supporting it. I think we have arrived at a structure that seems to be working well, and I've heard fewer complaints from people on different things. And I think the opening up the eligibility is a good thing. If people are concerned that a place doesn't have a strong enough base, that's what the study section is for. So, but not allowing people to apply because they didn't hit some really high mark, that doesn't really make as much sense. So I think those are reasonable recommendations. I do think that a place where I've seen other interactions is the P30s often link things like super funds and T32s, and they help form that additional network. And I don't know what sort of metric you can get around that, but I've seen that happen very well. And so when you talk about areas in the country that aren't covered, the super fund hits a lot of those, and those collaborate with the P30s. I think the coverage is better than we think when you think about the partnerships of the P30s. So I think part of it is just kind of making sure that we're capturing that information the right way. But I think that this is a really important program, and the current structure seems to be working very well. And so I'm very supportive of it. And I think the way it's laid out seems quite reasonable. Daryl, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Certainly, being a seedling coming from a P30, that's where my seeds were planted at Vanderbilt University in about the same time frame that Gary just indicated, 1989, 1990. Certainly, I'm a huge fan of the P30s over the years. And then that's where I met Dr. Tyson, as a matter of fact, who I see has his footprints on about 60, 70% of what NAEHS is doing. He was my program official for what we used to call the arts program. Remember? I think Elias Zerhouni indicated that that was one of the, in his words, one of the, how did he say it? It was the majority minority sort of P something is he phrased it such that he was very, very proud of that sort of nuanced version of P, I guess P like grants. It was an S11. And so certainly I agree with the concept, yes, but I think that we have to get to a point where we have some serious conversations about leveling the playing field a little bit more, as Gary was hinting at. Certainly, I'm not aware of any such minority serving or institutions that would possibly be able to meet that $3 million threshold that Cindy that you mentioned. And so I've always been, and it's easy to say that because when you grow up at Vanderbilt and then go to the other side of the street, you begin to see, some of these issues that are unbalanced. And so, we talked about this last year, Gary, remember, the rich keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poorer. And so at some point, we're going to have a conversation, as Cindy just suggested, where, what would be wrong with perhaps instead of having, the conglomerate numbers of P50, P30s that we have, what about 5 P20s, and then that would be subtracting a couple of those traditional rich keep getting richer, institutions from, and they have other resources. So I don't think that would hurt that much. And so I don't want to go too far in the weeds here, but I certainly think that in those evaluative concepts that Cindy was talking about, that there's certainly room for that, looking down the road. And so, but I do support the concept because I'm a P30 seedling myself. and so I think I can stop right there.
I want to thank you both for those comments, and Dr. Hood, to your last comment there. One of the things we have been talking about, and would like to have further conversation about too, is roles of like formative centers, like what would be good mechanisms to
yes,
build the capacity in groups that are doing a lot of environmental, not only doing environmental research, maybe not necessarily environmental health, but are also very ingrained in health disparities, environmental justice work, where environment can play definitely a contributing role to the disparities that we're seeing. And so how to build the interests in other universities to bring environmental health concepts into that and broaden that. So thank you for those comments, and I would like to hear more from others and from you and Gary as well. So thanks.
A quick comment on that is I do see an opportunity where NAEHS could request the applicants to engage with institutions that have not been as well represented in this space. I mean, I think that's a place where those sorts of partnerships, which we have, I've seen this very effective in CTSAs, where you have partner organizations that really help make these connections. And if that became part of the criteria, then it would happen.
I see Dr. Hoya and then Dr. Ingram's hands are raised.
Yeah, actually, I think that Dr. Hood's point is, I've been thinking about that a lot myself. What I was wondering is, as we try to expand and partner with other institutes, the question is, can we expand the definition of that $3 million mark so that it's not just for BS, but rather all environmental?
Cor-
Well, that is
Correct. So we wanted to, thank you for bringing that up. So I did want to clarify that that 3 million base is not NIH exclusively. It can be EPA grants, NSF grants. It can be foundation grants. It could be
Okay.
any other sort of resources of funding, because the work's going on in many different places that we in the past have only sort of focused on the NIH aspects of it. Is still, you know, some centers have like EPA Tic Tac grants that are like $10 million, which, you know, and are doing environmental work. So absolutely, that 3 million is much broader, but like 1.5 does have to be at NIH, and it does not have to be at NIEHS exclusively. It has to be environmentally related research that could be funded by other NIHICs, not only NIEHS.
and beyond. Okay.
Yep. Dr. Ingram, then Dr. Walker, and Hornbuckle.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe echo what Dr. Miller said about encouraging institutions to partner with some, in I guess my case, I've partnered with tribal colleges, but if there's some way that NIH can make it less cumbersome, because a lot of times the tribal colleges have very little infrastructure to be able to handle grants and the invoicing if it's a subcontract and all those kinds of things. So maybe, you know, thinking about trying to make it, like I said, a little less bureaucratic, because sometimes tribal colleges are like, we would love to do this, but it's just, we don't have the capacity. So figuring out how to do that. And I don't know if other, you know, Hispanic serving institutions or HBCUs have those same issues, but I know it's definitely a challenge. It's not a matter of not wanting to, it's a matter of, like I said, the infrastructure to be able to do it.
Thank you. Dr. Walker?
I hope as a non-voting member, I'm able to still comment on something like this.
You are.
Okay,
Yes, you are.
wonderful. Well, I'm really glad that Gary was leading this, because like Gary, I'm a huge fan of this program. And I think, as you said, Claudia, if you'd had 3 hours, we would probably still be entranced with all the amazing things going on in the program. But I do just want to say that there is a dichotomy that is emerging, and correct me if I'm wrong, you know, these were originally envisioned as infrastructure grants, with the idea that you would measure a large community that needed some kind of core or infrastructure support, and that this grant would be an important mechanism for that. You know, it's been a sea change, I think, for many institutions now in terms of appreciating the importance of cores and what a great investment cores are. And so I think there's still this little bit of I'm not going to call it friction, but this idea that the program is so much more now than infrastructure, right? So much more now than cores. And so back to the point about, could there be a role for a smaller type of grant? You know, this idea that if you had a smaller institution, maybe there still is one core that could actually really make a difference and help push the needle for that group of investigators. So I feel like it wouldn't be a terrible thing to consider as a true infrastructure grant if a smaller threshold could be considered, then to be able to bring that particular capability in. And then I also think it would be great to have a way to sort of evolve the program, the larger program, so that it wasn't still, you know, historically based as infrastructure, but the many other ways that the program is making an impact now.
Thank you for those comments. Dr. Hornbuckle?
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. It's really exciting that you're considering these changes to recognize the breadth of environmental research that pertains to environmental health that may not be just funded by NIH. But the program is already pretty competitive. And are you concerned that you're going to open it up to lots more organizations dilute the impact of these centers, or create a big challenge of figuring out how to decide which criteria to use in assessing whether it's environmental health related research.
I mean, that's an excellent point. Comments I made earlier, the rich get richer, right? The program is extremely competitive. It's been the budget has been, the budgets for the centers have been flat forever for the most part. There's, X amount of monies there to support the center, so it's not that they're continually growing. So opening up a bit more is like, it is upon us for them to make cases that the grants that they're including in their base are truly, conducting environmental health research as we define it, and not so a complement or, one off of that it doesn't really meet to the mission of the NIEHS. So that's something, we as program have to look at carefully. I think it's important to be able to allow for more universities to have the ability to apply and to have the time to be able to work within their university structure to think about advancing environmental health sciences. The centers that we currently have, as was stated earlier, if they don't evolve and change with the times, they don't remain competitive. But I also want to see that we're bringing in new investigators, and I think the thresholds that we've had in the past, the realities of the current budget situation, we have to be a little more flexible in how we think about environmental research that is that allows for eligibility of centers. But I mean, it's a point well taken. We have, we'll see what happens as that's instituted, as far as, if there's going to be all of a sudden a huge rush of programs coming, applying. I don't think so. It's not easy to put one of these together. To be honest. Dr. Inglewood.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, Claudia. I feel like it should be online somewhere. It was really helpful. I just have a couple of comments. The first one is, I am a center seedling. CEHS at MIT was absolutely formative. And the second comment is just to echo what you said, Claudia, which is these proposals are enormously time consuming to put together. They are really challenging. And, the worst thing is to invite people to do this. They spend a ton of time and then they don't get the funding, and they've just wasted their time, frankly. Yeah. Can there be a pre-proposal phase, a 5-page document that you can sort through and encourage people to apply when they're really in a competitive position, and not have people spend a ton of time if they're not?
So that's a really interesting concept, something that I think we can explore internally to see, from the bureaucratic mechanistic side, how we might be able to do that. But that is a point well taken. And it also, I think, provides opportunities, if not ready now, to help guide what they can do, to work on those for maybe a future. But that's a very interesting suggestion that we'll take back and think about, as have many of the comments that have been made. We've got lots of food for thought here in thinking about the future of the center. So thank you. Dr. Hornbuckle, I see your hand raised.
There are no additional comments or questions. I think that we are ready to call the motion to approve this concept. So again, I encourage council members to go ahead and get logged into your ECB, but may I have a motion from council to approve this concept?
Can I motion or not?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Am I allowed to? I don't know.
Yes, you are.
I'll motion to approve.
And I second it for sure.
Thank you, Gary and Daryl. And then if council members would please vote in the ECB, and Valerie, if you could let me know when we have quorum.
And I just want to thank everyone for your comments and engagement in this. I feel like a cheerleader for the core studies program. I'm really proud of it. I think it's an awesome program, and whatever we can do to make it better, to be able to expand it, to bring in more groups. We've got a lot to think about, and appreciate everybody's thoughts on this.
So we've reached quorum. We're at 7 yeses.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. And Rick, I see you have your hand
Yeah.
raised.
David, before we go on, I just wanted to call everyone's attention to the chat box that both Trevor and I put a note in there. So actually, in the context of the rich getting richer, this is a topic that the IC directors have been discussing at length. And in fact, this morning, Marie Bernard, who's our COSWAD, talked about this program called the EARA program. And it's really an attempt to reach out to what they call RAIs. These are institutions that have a historical mission to serve populations underrepresented in biomedical and behavioral research. And so it's an attempt to reach out and then put PIs and investigators at those organizations in contact with program officers and potentially do mock study sections. So it's a way to help educate people at these organizations on how to both submit a competitive NIH grant. So it's actually pretty encouraging. Not directly related to P30, but I thought I'd throw that in there. It was fresh in my mind from the IC directors meeting this morning.
Great, thanks, Rick. So since we have a quorum on that, we'll consider that concept approved, and we'll move on to our second concept for discussion today, which is Takara Chamberlain. If Takara is on and ready to share your screen. So this is continuing activities for the research on the East Palestine train derailment. And you are full screen. Take it away.
All right. Can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. All righty. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for your time. Again, my name is Takara Chamberlain, and I'm a health specialist in the Population Health Branch and a program manager for the Time-Sensitive Research Program. Today, I will be presenting a concept for the proposed East Palestine Train Derailment Health Study. This concept addresses ongoing concerns from the citizens of East Palestine, Ohio, surrounding counties, and congressional interest. I'll be giving a brief overview of the disaster, highlighting community concerns, possible strategies for continuing to address this disaster, and our current efforts. On February 3rd, 2023, a freight train carrying 150 cars derailed in the village of East Palestine, Ohio. The train, owned by Norfolk Southern Railway, contained 20 rail cars carrying hazardous chemicals. As a consequence of the derailment, many of the rail cars leaked their contents and caught on fire, releasing a plume of toxic smoke into the air and an unrealized leaching of chemicals into local waterways. The small community of East Palestine, with only about 4,700 residents, have been grappling with the aftermath ever since. A controlled burn was conducted 3 days after the derailment to prevent a potential explosion. Volatile organic chemicals were released into the atmosphere, fueling exposure-related concerns with community members and first responders. Many cited both symptoms and concerns related to respiratory health, gastrointestinal issues, children's health, and mental and behavioral health. In response to this disaster event, local, state, and federal agencies have worked collaboratively to monitor the air, water, and soil for chemicals and residents for adverse health impacts. NIEHS also responded to the call by concerned residents in the scientific community. We received research proposals related to the derailment through a time-sensitive research program that supports rapid review and funding in response to disasters. NIEHS, with support from several NIH institutes, commissioned the National Academies to hold a 2-day workshop focused on exploring the potential surveillance, partnerships, and research priorities related to short and long-term human health impacts. This virtual meeting was held on November 6th through 7th of 2023. 6 time-sensitive R21 awards were made in January of 2024 and announced by President Joe Biden during his first visit to East Palestine in February of 2024. The 2-day NAEHS workshop convened subject matter experts from the federal government, private sector, academia, and the impacted community. The primary goals of this workshop were to explore the potential surveillance, partnerships, and research priorities related to short and long-term human health impacts of the chemical exposures. The final report was released in January of this year. Some of the takeaways from the NAEHS workshop included the short and long-term needs and potential impacts of the East Palestine community, a need for clear communication plan to share federal efforts in response to the derailment, identified research and care gaps, and a need to understand and address the challenges to clinicians that are caring for the impacted community members. In response to these takeaways, NIEHS has started to have conversations about the best strategies to address the ongoing community concerns. We have published a webpage highlighting our current funded efforts in the area and links to information from other federal partners that we have developed the one-pager for all of our projects. We also regularly discuss gaps identified by the community and communicated by our funded project teams. And we have an open line of communication with the Columbiana County Health Department and County Health Commissioner, Dr. Wesley Venz. Some of the identified short-term strategies from the NAEHS report included maintaining community partnerships, communication, and trust building while transitioning from response to long-term research surveillance, establishing registries to track exposed individuals long-term and relate health outcomes to the disaster, developing continuing education and training to equip health care providers to monitor and address environmental health issues, employing trauma-informed mental and behavioral health interventions alongside assessing toxic exposures, using diverse biomarkers to reconstruct past exposures and understand persistent body burden, continuously monitoring the environment along with exposure pathways like vapor intrusion as contamination spreads over time, and sharing findings transparently and accessibly with affected communities throughout the process. Longer-term strategies from the NAEHS report included resolving uncertainties around health impacts through continued research and data expansion, mitigating potential damage due to exposures, and developing multi-generational tracking, given the possibility of latent effects emerging in those exposed during vulnerable periods of development. Applying advanced techniques like metabolomics, proteomics, and epigenetics to identify molecular signals predating the development of disease. Evaluating interactions between chemical exposures and other stressors to determine how mixtures impact health, and bridging disconnects impeding public health, academic studies, and community priorities around the disaster. Our funded studies have already collected environmental and biological samples for current and future studies and administered surveys. These studies are not only focusing on chemical exposures, but social stressors as well. Outcomes of concern from these studies have included acute symptoms and ongoing respiratory, liver, and metabolic effects and mental health. Fully understanding the impact on such a small community, NIEHS program staff provides support to ensure that the project teams coordinate to reduce overall burden to the community. The groups have been meeting bi-weekly with support from NIEHS program staff since April of this year. In addition to some of the coordination efforts already highlighted, we have worked to develop fact sheets and other literature to distribute among the community. We have also worked with our disaster research response program and continue to standardize communication with our East Palestine webpage and a grantee subpage with additional information about each project. The project teams have also welcomed Dr. Wesley Venz, who is again, the Columbiana County Health Commissioner, to a coordinated call to discuss the continued needs of the community and for project updates. And just to give you an example of these coordination efforts, we recently had two project teams that worked together for biospecimen collection at a community event for the State of the Science in July. On April 5th, the Village of East Palestine Healthcare Task Force met to discuss federal coordination efforts, potential physiological impacts of the identified chemicals of concern, standards of care for exposed individuals, healthcare monitoring data management, and funding needs. And on April 15th, the White House Office of Public Engagement held a virtual briefing that included federal, state, and local leaders, as well as research and community partners who provided environmental, economic, and health updates. This was our all-of-government response. Our project teams have continued to identify community concerns that have been voiced to them during their varied in-person interactions at community events. Those concerns include children's health, especially neurological and respiratory health, longer-term studies to follow up on health concerns, registries for surveillance and monitoring the health impacts reported by community members, contamination of food sources due to plant uptake, in particular peaches, the possible impacts on resource and care availability if relocating outside of the impacted area, access to specialized testing, and ongoing concerns with mental and behavioral health, specifically PTSD in residents and in emergency responders. This concept is focusing on a community academic partnership. We thought that this mechanism would be the most appropriate as it would support multiple projects in the long term with multidisciplinary involvement. This mechanism also involves an organized effort with projects designed to investigate specific objectives. The guiding principles of this model will include strong community involvement, multi-directional communication strategies, and timely report back of research results. The added benefits of this mechanism include the ability to conduct multiple projects to address community concerns. It minimizes burden on study participants, encourages coordination and collaboration among multidisciplinary teams, and it supports the intent to provide long-term support to address ongoing health and environmental concerns. Here we have highlighted the program staff that continue to provide support to our time-sensitive project teams. And here are the links to some of the resources that I have highlighted in this presentation. And now Dr. Claudia Thompson will be joining me for questions and discussion from our council discussants, Dr. Stefania Cormier and Janie Ingram. Thank you, and we are ready to have a good discussion.
Thank you, Tokra. That was a fantastic discussion. Should I go now, or does Dr. Thompson or Claudia want to go?
No, Stefania, I think you can go ahead and do your review.
Okay. All right. So first of all, I'd like to, I'm sorry, my voice is a little off. I'd like to applaud NAEHS for their rapid response and their proactive stance on this work to date. I think it's been a fantastic piece of work, and I think that it's benefited the communities tremendously. Second, I think that this is a timely mechanism, and it's critical. We have actually data coming out that demonstrate that environmentally persistent free radicals, which are precursors of dioxins and furans, are elevated in soil samples close to the proximity of that derailment site, and that samples taken even after cleanup still have these chemicals and dioxins and furans and other precursors still in them. Since EPRs, dioxins, and furans are persistent compounds with long lifetimes, that means that there's a significant potential for long-term elevated health risk in this community. And so studying this, especially across lifespan or a longer time period, I think is definitely warranted. I think the U19 mechanism as a cooperative agreement is actually a very appropriate mechanism, because one of the biggest concerns that we always have with working with the communities is whether or not the community develops research fatigue. And I think that the coordinated effort will help avoid that research fatigue and hopefully make that long-term study something that is a reality, because I think that that's what's needed. And then finally, I think a U19 cooperative will actually increase data harmonization across the study, making it one, more efficient, but also a good and efficient and economical use of shared resources.
Thank you.
That's all.
Great, thank you. I totally agree with what Dr. Cormier talked about, as well as I do thank NAEHS for a rapid response to this issue. So my discussion points are really from a bit of an experience working with the Gold King mine spill that happened in 2015 back. It happened in like central Colorado, but then the spill went down into the San Juan River and across the Navajo Nation. And honestly, the initial response, and it wasn't from NIEHS, more from EPA, was terrible. So the community had a very, very negative feel for the fact that this thing happened and it seemed like no one cared, or they were trying to minimize it. So, but I was involved with a team of folks that got an R21 grant to look at the impacts, not just environmentally, but also on the community. And then there were other groups doing it. So my comments are mainly, it looks like there is really good coordination, not just amongst those that have been funded through NIH, but also other agencies, because what I observed in the sort of report backs to the communities, they don't care where the money's coming from. They want to see that researchers are, providing information that has been to some extent, worked through by the different groups, so that you're not getting different pieces of information. Also, very important to help provide that information that is understandable. I know that my group did a little too many PowerPoint slides, and the grandmas would leave is it safe or not? That's what we want to know. So just keeping that in mind. So just trying to make sure that there's coordination, but it seems like there's already been that thought. The other thing is that in these new funding opportunities is to, and I know this is difficult, but is there ways that the researchers actually either have some established connections to this area, because then the trust building has already moved forward, not someone coming in from the outside. Sometimes that is really difficult on communities because they have no idea who this person is, or even people that are within the community. The group that I was with, there were a number of Navajo researchers, so I think that helped. So I think that's an issue. And then finally, and you did talk a little bit about this, but that the mental health aspect of it is huge. That was probably one of the most impactful things. And like I said, it partly happened because these communities had no idea this was happening until they saw the river turn yellow. And then there were some crazy things that happened right after that that were very, very negative. So I just think those are things to consider. But I think the coordination thing is the most important, because like I said, the community doesn't understand these funding mechanisms, nor do they really care, but they really want the information, and safety is very important. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for the feedback from both of you. And I do want to highlight that, several of our teams have visited the area in person and have some of those long-term relationships, especially with Dr. Erin Haynes with the University of Kentucky and Dr. Frederick Schumacher with Case Western. So, we're trying to lay that groundwork now. We're trying to nurture those relationships and just make sure we're being as transparent and approachable and reachable as possible with this community.
I think
Dr. Hood? Oh, sorry, Claudia.
Just really quick, I just wanted to add to that. The other thing I think that's been really critical and important is Dr. Vins, who's the Columbiana Public
Yes.
Health, heads that office. He has been very encouraging, has been very interested in the research and the continued sort of conversations, interaction with him, and how what is being developed can be informative as they're rolling out their sort of public health and clinical response to address the health concerns of the residents in the area.
Mhm. Mhm.
Dr.
Oh,
Hood?
yeah, I just want to say that I'm right here in Ohio, so we were pulled into this derailment scenario from both a scientist perspective, served on the committee. Well, Aubrey certainly recalls that was a long, that really, it was, although it was a tragedy and an accident in terms of personally, in terms of what we do as scientists and academicians, one of the most fulfilling chapters in my life thus far. The way that the community accepted us, it was just outstanding. Being a community engaged researcher now, it just checked all of the boxes, and we've learned a lot. I think that I served with on Maureen's committee, and of course I couldn't get a word in edgewise, for those of you that know Maureen, she's a good friend of mine. Yeah, and we're working with Case Western, as well as some ancillary work with Maureen's group. So NAEHS, it's a very, very difficult scenario, and I think that we came out on the upside, and going forward, we learned so much there that we'll be able to apply this if and when it happens again, and we know it's going to happen again somewhere. So thank you all.
Thank you for that feedback.
Mhm, mhm.
Dr. Walker?
Yes, and I apologize, I've not been able to access my council book. I'm working with the help desk to figure out exactly why that is. So I'm just wondering about how this looks for the future when similar sorts of disasters happen. Whether this is a mechanism that would be requested, appropriate, or there would have to be some judgment. Yes, we did it now. No, we're not going to do it this time. And then my second question was really about how much credit is NIEHS getting for all the good work that's being done? I imagine that a lot of people would say, oh, it's EPA, or, oh, it's, somebody else. And so I would just love to know that NIEHS is being recognized for the really critical work that's being done. So those are my two questions.
Thank you for those. So I'll attack the second question first. I think we are getting some recognition. We are being pulled into a lot of conversations across the government to provide technical assistance and to highlight these funded projects. Is it a ton of recognition? I don't think so, but I think really where the attention should lie right now is with the community and just the good work that we're trying to support and hopefully can continue to support in the future.
If I can add to that, Cheryl, and to Carl. Not that we've branded, but the 6 groups are being supported through the time sensitive. Like, we have a common fact sheet that regardless of who's doing what, they share across. If they're enrolling people for a study, they make them aware, they make the communities aware of other activities that are going on. And I think the sort of continued presence of some who've been in that area a long time and working with their community advisory boards that each of these groups has, I think will sort of keep NIEHS a bit on the forefront there. There's been a lot of congressional interest in this program, and we've responded multiple times to their interests in this, and see the R21 program is really something critical for providing some of that research needs to understand the impacts on that. As far as the first part, so the time sensitive program itself is always open to any disaster that's happening. Whether that elevates into something else, I think that's on a case by case sort of a case-by-case basis, maybe having to do with the novelty, where the interests are lying at many different levels. And so it's something that we don't take lightly. I don't think we can respond to everyone in a coordinated, I think the last time we really did a coordinated effort like this was with the Deepwater Horizon, where we did have both intramural research and an extramural response to that. So I think it's very situational dependent.
I asked that, and not because it necessarily deserves an answer right now, but here we make the case that we are very prone to disasters in the Houston Gulf Coast area, man-made and natural, and I certainly have the sense that these are going to be more and more common, whether they're driven by climate or other factors. And so it just would be good to think about what would the mechanism look like moving forward? What would the bar be where now you get considered for a more continuous, coordinated form of support? And maybe that even gets somehow codified so that as these disasters happen, people at least understand, well, there might be the opportunity down the road for this sort of thing to happen. So thank you, Claudia. That was very helpful.
Rick, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so just wanted to just add something here, and I don't know if Gwen is still on, but the DR2 program, it's led by NIEHS, but it's an NIH effort. So there are other ICs that participate in this, and so I'm working with other IC directors, encouraging them to put some skin in the game, so that NIEHS isn't the only IC who has to be funding these things. I don't know, Gwen, do you want to just expand on this?
Well, it is true. And in fact, Friday, we're having our annual federal interagency working group meeting around the disaster response program. And so there are many, it's probably close to 20 different groups that have interests. And some of our partners, there's an NIH interest group as well that meets pretty regularly that discusses these kinds of things. I think it's critical to understand that anytime any of these things happen, it's a government-wide response with different, responsibilities for recovery and then the research. And I guess our thrust in the past has been to, amplify the research piece as people are going through recovery and then thinking about the short-term and long-term implications post-disaster. Another piece of this that's related is that in our climate initiative, we also recognize the need for rapid response work, and we've partnered with the National Science Foundation. They actually have mechanisms that make their rapid response even more rapid than our rapid response. And so in the climate space, we've taken the opportunity to build new partnerships to help to do that. Our disaster response time-sensitive program has also funded lots of work over the years related to climate-related disasters. So, these kinds of things come together, and there's a lot of people talking about what these things look like. I'll just say one more thing. In the scheme of things, the other agencies have been really front and center, right? So when there's a government response with an incident control and FEMA and CDC and ATSDR all have EPA have very codified responsibilities, those groups fall back because they're focusing on recovery and they're doing maybe some preliminary work to assess the hazard like the ATSDR did with their surveys. And NIEHS and NIH have the opportunity to look at it from a longer term. What are the short-term health effects and the long-term health effects? And of course, our experience in the community engagement environmental justice arena helps us understand the importance for that. And I think that's where this work that Takara has talked about there. So in terms of the credit piece that Cheryl raised, people know who we are and what we're doing, and we will be getting credit for the good work that the groups are doing both now and into the future.
Yeah, the NAEHS meeting that happened to develop a comprehensive plan for East Palestine, that, if I remember correctly, Gwen, that was actually co-funded by a number of ICs. So yeah, we're trying to get out there and develop an NIH-wide, very similar to what we're doing with climate change. I think NAEHS is acknowledged, much to Gwen and Claudia and others' credit for taking the lead on organization. But we're encouraging some other ICs to drop a few coins in the tin cup to really bring the total level of support up to where it really needs to be. Yeah, thanks to Cara. So it looks like there are 6 different ICs contributing to the workshop.
Maria, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I think Gwen addressed my question to a certain extent, which is, looking, how do we cabin out climate-related disasters to the extent we want to do that? Even looking at the exposome and thinking about, environmental impacts, to what extent are we putting things under the heading of climate and climate justice?
Gwen, you want to take that one?
Sorry, I didn't hear the whole question. My video went out, so I apologize. If you could just ask the question part. I heard the part that was the run up to the question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about to what extent are we looking at the work that that NAEHS is doing and environmental impacts on health in the context of climate and climate justice? Does it make sense for us to put things under that category, and to what extent are we doing so?
Okay, so yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. I think some of it, I think David touched upon this earlier in his presentation this morning when he talked about some of the work of the Partnerships for Environmental Health program, where last February, I believe it was, their annual meeting was really focused on this community engagement work and with a focus on climate, environmental justice and climate justice. All of our programs in the climate initiative have community engagement components to it. We've had annual meetings where we've had input from advocacy groups that are working in the climate justice space. And as we build our cohort of funded studies in the climate space, this is something that, of course, is as important as any of the other issues. And so I think creating the mechanism to bring the community voices into the research gives that space to consider the components of the climate justice, action planning or, critical concerns that the community voices have. So we have several ways to do that within that initiative, and so far it's going pretty well. So we would continue to do that.
Thanks, Gwen. Given the time and seeing no additional hands up, I'm going to ask council members to, Annette, I see your hand.
Yes, and I'm so sorry. I have not figured out in this program how to raise my hand. So just quickly, I wanted to give kudos to this effort and activity, particularly for that component where you're producing a coordinated, unified messaging across the federal government. David mentioned this morning that we have that activity on the NECRI. And one of the specific activities that we're looking at to perform maybe before the end of the year or early next year is a workshop that kind of brings together the best practices on how do we come up with unified governmental messaging on contaminants of emerging concern. A little bit different than this particular activity, but I'm sure that we can have some lessons learned from this group as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Annette. So let me ask council members to go ahead and log back into your ECB. And then if I may request a motion to approve this concept.
I move that we approve this concept.
Thank you, Steph. And may I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Maria. And if council members could please vote. And Ashley, let me know when we have quorum.
We have quorum.
Excellent. Thank you all. So Rick, I'll turn it over to you to adjourn our open session.
Well, let me just thank everyone, all members of council. It's a lot of work to function on council. So I know I appreciate that. All my colleagues appreciate that. It's really important. The work that you're doing is critically important. So, and I also appreciate and thanks for everyone who has joined from outside NAEHS and outside council. So thank you very much. Trevor, as our deputy director, do you want to make any additional comments?
Rick, no, I'll just add to your thanks. I think we really appreciate the engagement we've had. I thought the council has given us some really important advice and support for the program. So thank you all.
Excellent. Okay, so I guess I don't have my gavel. Okay.
You don't travel to Bethesda with your gavel?
Gavel bangs on my desk here in Building 31 in Bethesda. So we are officially out of the open session.
Thank you, Rick.